Thank you for being here and welcome everyone to our event, EU Standardization Strategy, Reinforcing Europe's Role in Global Standard Setting, organized by Small Business Standards. My name is Andrea Raffelli. I'm a Standardization Policy Officer here at SBS. First off, I would like to thank our speakers for the time and participation, for being here, and obviously all of you in attendance. Just a little bit of admin, a little bit of housekeeping before starting the proceedings. We will start with Ms. Silvia Vaccaro from the European Commission, giving us some opening remarks, presenting the standardization strategy. After that, we will move on to our panel for 2 rounds of questions to each of our speakers. After these questions, we will proceed with our Q&A session. The audience will have the chance to ask questions to our speakers by putting them in writing in the Q&A panel that you see at the bottom of our screen. Unfortunately, because of a scheduled conflict with the European Parliament committee meeting, Mr. Bütikofer will have to leave us a bit early and will not be able to be present for the Q&A session. We ask you to please write as part of the question if there are specific panelists that you would like to address your question to. So with this bit of housekeeping out of the way, we can start our event off. The new standardization strategy has been presented in February by the European Commission, and its overarching objective is to reinforce Europe's role in global standard setting. At the same time, it puts a strong emphasis on the need to further involve and facilitate the access of SMEs and other stakeholders, societal stakeholders, to standardization. During the discussion, we will address 2 main topics that emerge from the strategy. First off, how can Europe become a true global standard setter rather than standard taker, to use an expression that is very dear to our Commissioner Breton, and how can this ambition be made a reality in practice? And then, how can we support further involvement of European SMEs in European and international standardization? First off, to begin, let's all get a better grasp of the strategy itself, of its structures and goals. And for this, we will give the floor to Ms. Silvia Vaccaro, who works in the Standards Policy Unit at DG GROW, where in particular, she is responsible for international relations with countries outside of the EU. Previously, she worked for several years at Sensenelec, where she was responsible for international cooperation. So Ms. Vaccaro, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be here. I had to send both my head of unit and my deputy on holiday so that I could be with you today. But no, it's really a pleasure to be here. And I'll start with the boring things. So the boring thing is that standardization strategy is not a single document, but we have adopted what it's called a package on standardization that has the standardization strategy. That's, let's say, the most important piece. But then, because of the strategy, we also propose to Parliament and Council a technical amendment to the regulation, and I will explain a little bit later why. There's also a report on the implementation of our regulation 1025/2012, because every 5 years we have to do that. And we also added the annual union work program that, as you all know, it's basically the to-do list and the wish list combined in one of what the Commission intends to do with standardization the year after. We all know that when I started quite a long time ago, working for the Manufacturing Association in Italy, standards were something really, really technical. I could see that they were important, but there was no real excitement around them. It was usually done by middle-aged, if not third-age men. And but I thought it was a very interesting. So that's why I started with standardization, and I stuck to standardization a little bit like Hotel California. You check in, but you never check out. And that's why in these kind of fora, we always meet more or less people who had worked in Sensenelec or to which we were connected some way or the other. Saying that, standards are really important. They are everywhere. Everything that you do every day is basically managed by standards, like your shoe size, your clothes, your mobile phone, the toys for your kids. So everything has to do with standards. And lately, standards have become really a geopolitical issue, in the sense that while until, let's say, 5-6 years ago, Europe was playing well above their level in the international standardization, basically ISO, IEC, where the standards produced there were mostly coordinated by European stakeholders, European standardization body. Now we are seeing that some trading partners are becoming more and more assertive, and they are taking control of quite a few interesting issues. Of course, we actually welcome that our trading partners play at the international level rather than go by themselves and do their own standards and create possibly barriers to trade. But on the other hand, as you rightly said, we would like to keep on being very relevant at the international level. Of course, also the world has become more and more complex. So we are seeing it at European level, that basically ICT is everywhere, AI will be everywhere. So we need to have standardization that also keeps on answering to our own values and our own beliefs. Then we have a problem. Well, we have a problem of good governance, in the sense that for standards, for harmonized standards, which are the standards that support European legislation, we would like the decision of working on this standard and then implementing the standards at the end to be taken by European stakeholders. So European standardization body and possibly European industry. But as you know, our system is very open. And to the point that in some cases, this could create a problem. Because if we see, for example, in ETSI, the biggest member is Huawei from China, and then there is Facebook, Google, Apple. So to find the first European, you have to go down the list, number 8 or 9. So that's why we think that we need to have a system that delivers on implementation of key EU policies, like human approach to artificial intelligence, cyber resilience, space defense, green technologies. So on these kind of issues, we would like the European values to be upheld. Then we also have, obviously, resources are limited everywhere. So we would like to have a certain priority setting and speed. Speed is an issue. Of course, the speed shouldn't go at the expense of quality. So it's not an easy dichotomy to have fast standards which are also of very high quality. So this is another way. So for this, we have decided to create a high-level forum that will assist the Commission. It will be basically an expert group that will help the Commission with the European Parliament and the Council to define the priorities for standardization for Europe. And we also will create a EU Excellence Hub and appoint a Chief Standardization Officer, which will be coordinating both for the forum and the Excellence Hub. The EU Excellence Hub will be basically based on the European Commission people working on standards. We have realized that we have more than 1,000 people in the Commission working on standards. So we would like to gather all this experience and use it in a good way. And then, of course, we have the mantra, which is the Green Deal and the Europe Digital Decade and the resilience. So we need to revise current standards to be in line with these priorities, which are really essential for Europe. And also, the annual Union Work Programme will reflect our standardization priorities and also the kind of funding that we will have to put in it. Regarding the good governance, basically, we have proposed an amendment to the regulation, but the decision is in the hands of the national standardization bodies. Moreover, we want more inclusiveness in the European standardization bodies, but also at national level, in order to comply better with the regulation 1025/2012. And we would like to have some sort of member states peer review on SME, user, and civil society conditions in order to make them more friendly, not only at the European level, but also at the national level. And this probably the standardization body will like it a little less, is that we have a very strong commitment to the European standardization system, but we need also to have in legislation some sort of fallback option in case the guidance and the standards that we have asked the European standardization body are not delivered. So this does not mean that the Commission will start making standards, but simply that we need to have a system in which, if we don't get the result that we want, the Commission can do something by itself in order to have to fulfill all the issues. If we go back a little bit on the geopolitics, we basically see that we have quite a few national members in ISO, in IEC, and even in ITU, but there's not really a coordination between our member states. The idea so far was that, well, since CENELEC cannot compete with ISO and IEC, they cannot conflict with them. They even, and that we find very important, the fact that they have an agreement both with the ISO and with IEC in order to avoid duplication, in order to avoid conflicting standards, which is something that in Europe we really don't like. And that's why we have a system where we tend to have, when there is one European standards, the national members are obliged to withdraw national conflicting standards in order for us to have a coherent system of standards that will not confuse too much our economic operators. Then we would like also, I am participating to most of the FTA negotiation on the TBT, so on the technical barriers to trade, where standards is one of the pillars. And we would like to monitor a bit better what happens to the implementation of standards and in our partners. So the idea would also be to have a system of information at European level, but also a system of information with our close and let's say like-minded trading partners. And for that, I can tell you that, for example, in the TTC, the Trade and Technology Council with the US, we have the first working group is actually on technology standards. So both the EU and the US realize the importance and geopolitical importance of standards, and we are working on it. And I must say that while in TTIP there was always a bit of a conflict between the EU and the US, in the sense that we were trying hopelessly to change each other's system. Now, the first conclusion that we found in the TTC, in the working group on standards, was that we will not try to change each other's system, but we will try to work together on new issue, on emerging technology, where neither party has already an established system. Of course, again, we will not make standards with the US at government level, but we will ask and count on our standardization body to cooperate in order to have common standards, or, and that's the option we prefer, to work directly at international level together. And in this respect, for example, the agreement between CEN and ASTM is a very good example of how things could actually develop. Another thing we would like to do is to have a very good look at innovation and pre-normative work, because the earliest an innovation can be standardized, the easier will be for the consumer to have access to safe products. Also, we would like to have more education on standards, because the current let's say the current generation of standardizer is getting older and closer to retirement. And we would like to entice also younger professionals to be interested in the standardization process. So, for example, we will try to set up some EU university days on standardization and see what happens. Of course, these are all things that are very new. We started the standardization strategy in February, so we will have to see bit by bit how we will address the issue. And now I'm getting to the point that's probably more interesting for you, is the inclusiveness in the European standardization system. SMEs, consumers, and civil society, we find their contribution essential for harmonized standards. Because as the more a standard is made by consensus, the more will be applied and the more people will co-own it and implement it as part of their daily lives. Of course, we need to support and strengthen the participation of these civil society stakeholders. And we need to have quality and compliance with the legislation in the standards safeguarded. Because as you know, if the standard is supporting European legislation, we would like very much to have basically an assessment done by the Commission with the harmonized standards consultant in order to have standards that are actually complying with the requirements of the legislation. So basically, this is about, say, a general framework of the strategy, and I welcome the discussion afterwards. And I'm ready to answer questions as far as I can answer them, because we don't have yet all the pieces of the puzzle. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Vaccaro, for your intervention. Indeed, we can see both from the document and from your presentation how comprehensive and far-reaching the strategy is in its scope, in its goals and ambitions. This was a great way to set the table up for our discussion, and we will get back to you during our panel. So we can actually now move on to the start of our discussion itself. And first we will go to Mr. Bütikofer, MEP. He is the chair of the Delegation for Relations with China and a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and of the Delegation for Relations with the US in the European Parliament. So, Mr. Bütikofer, thank you very much for being here. From a political and strategic perspective, as an MEP, what is your general opinion about the strategy and what you think are the most important elements? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raffaelli, for having me. And I also want to thank Mrs. Vaccaro for an excellent overview. I probably fall into your category of third-age men, Mrs. Vaccaro, but if I remember correctly, I started being interested in standards even when I still thought I was middle-aged. You are exactly right with that description, because indeed for a long, long time, standardization issues have been considered unsexy. And as you said, this is a misconception, because standardization indeed plays a major role in a developing geopolitical contest that we have to be aware of. I believe we have good reasons of being proud of the European standardization system, which has its own peculiar qualities. It's multi-layered, industry-based, and inclusive, as you have described it, Mrs. Vaccaro. That are certainly strengths to be held on to. But at the same time, we are indeed, as you said, losing weight in international standardization activities. That in and of itself would not necessarily be a major problem if the countries that are beginning to play an increasing role could be considered like-minded. because then you could sort of cooperate with them on a fair basis. But indeed, that is increasingly not the case. And I would sort of put that under the umbrella of this conversation, under the umbrella of an assault on multilateralism that we see in different dimensions of our international relations. This assault can be described as a pincer movement. On one hand, some countries use international institutions to pursue authoritarian political goals, also in the context of standardization. And on the other hand, the same countries try to restrict the reach of international rules by enforcing their own rules and substituting their own rules for international rules, even where the latter would exist. And clearly, when we look at the scene as it develops, we have to talk about China, because that's the country that is giving us the most reason to be concerned. For instance, in the context of the ITU, China really pushed hard to create new standards for the future of the internet that would include their thinking of censorship as a necessary ingredient of stability, as a basis for international cooperation, which is, of course, not at all compatible with the rules that we have been adopting and following, and our line of thinking, our values. So here comes now the standardization strategy of the European Union, which you have described, Ms. Vaccaro. And I am, broadly speaking, very much in favor of going in that direction. I think that a lot of issues have been picked up that we should indeed address. The basic principle that we should hold on to would be two basic principles. Number one, the inclusiveness. We have to strengthen the inclusiveness, because inclusiveness is one core strength of our system. And second, we have to make sure that we are not substituting an industry-based approach to standardization by a state-based approach. I think that the strategy fits both those criteria, and that's why I think it's a good strategy. And we have to pursue that strategy on so many different fronts that indeed one core element of our pursuit of efficiency and effectiveness is better coordination. That's why I particularly welcome the proposal to create a chief standardization officer. I think that is indeed has long been a need that has evaded us. But we not only have to coordinate within Brussels or between Brussels and the member states, but, and I also sign on to that, we also have to cooperate with like-minded partners globally. And the Trade and Tech Council has already been mentioned. This is a premier opportunity for us in the European Union to demonstrate that we're not just selfish and not just trying to look for Europe's role, but that we are willing to play ball with partners, like-minded partners, also to make sure that the international system is fair and open to other players. My last point, and I can agree with almost everything that's been said. My last point is that we, even though this is a geopolitical debate now, we must make sure that we don't give too little emphasis on the transformational challenges that we're up against at the same time. You mentioned that, Ms. Vaccaro, but the European Green Deal, the digital decade, the necessities to create more resilient supply chains, all of that is indeed required. And whether we team up better, that's one element, but whether we take into account those novel challenges, those transformational challenges, that will also decide over whether our standardization system will be able to stand up to international competition, that will be able to secure a leading role for European industry in international standardization and for remaining a standard setter. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Bütikofer, for your opinion and your insight. Actually, following up on one of the points that you make about the inclusion, we will go in this direction on one of the main topics of the strategy. Speaking as SBS, one of the topics that touches us the most, that of inclusiveness in standardization, particularly for SMEs. To stand on this front, we will go to our Secretary General, Ms. Maitane Olavarria. She has been our Secretary General here at SBS since January 2020. Previously, she has worked in different European industry associations and in SEN and SENELEC for around 10 years. So Maitane, as we all know, the strategy puts a strong emphasis on SMEs and inclusiveness, but tell us, why is inclusiveness so important and what are the main obstacles to the participation of SMEs in standardization? You have the floor.
Thank you, Andrea, for the floor, and thank you for the opportunity of speaking. So I think if we look at inclusiveness, what Silvia Vaccaro said, I think is the main reason why we should be looking also at inclusiveness and why it is important. If we ensure that the standards take into account the interest and the needs of all stakeholders, we are ensuring that these standards are actually implemented and used. So that is why it is important to have all stakeholders around the table. If we also talk about SMEs, I think we all know this, but we know that they represent the majority of businesses, 99.8% of the business in Europe, and they are really key for innovation and for growth in Europe. So standards, as you know, they are in many cases a requirement to access markets and are used to support also the implementation of legislation, but not only. Mr. Bütikofer was talking also about the transformational challenges we are facing. So they are also key actually in the green and digital transition that we are talking about now in Europe, and that can really support SMEs when they are rightly developed and take into account their needs to actually make a reality this transformation. So as I said, inclusiveness is important. It's important to make sure everybody is around the table precisely to ensure that these standards take into account all these elements, and it's important that SMEs are there so that the standards don't only meet the needs of bigger companies, but also of SMEs, which are going to be key if we really want to make this transformation a reality. If we talk about obstacles and what are the main obstacles, I mean, there are several, but I think I will mention mainly three. So for me, the first obstacle would be lack of awareness and information on standardization developments. So we know not all SMEs are aware of the importance of standards, but I think it's also important to take into account that the number of standards is constantly increasing. There are many standards, and for SMEs, even if they are aware about the importance of standardization, it's difficult to know which standards are being developed at national, European, international, so there are different layers as well. and to identify those that are especially relevant for them so that they are able to participate and bring the SME perspective into the development of those standards. So for me, this is one of the main obstacles, and that's why we need efficient tools, monitoring tools, in order to be able to identify those standards that are relevant for SMEs. The second one, which is an important one, is also lack of resources for participation. And I think we are all aware that SMEs, and especially micro enterprises, have less resources, financial, but also time, staff, to be able to follow and be dedicated to standardization. So that would be, for me, the second big obstacle for the participation of SMEs. And these two things, the lack of resources, and also the difficulty in identifying those standards where they need to be on the table, especially those standards that are important for them, leads also to the underrepresentation of SMEs and their interest in the standardization process. For us, if a system is to be inclusive, it needs to allow access of all stakeholders, and that the interests are represented and duly considered. And I think Silvia Vaccaro mentioned before the issue of, let's say, the non-balanced representation in some instances at European level that could ensure that we take into account the interest of European stakeholders and SMEs. And this is also an important element, I think, of the strategy that we need to look at: governance and the balanced representation of all interests, including SMEs. And so this is also a very important obstacle. And just maybe to finalize, so when we look at international standardization, I think these aspects are even a bigger challenge, because for SMEs, following the developments at international level is even more difficult. And of course, also the resources to follow international standardization for SMEs, for everybody is a higher level of resources that they need, but for SMEs is even more difficult, because we are talking also about international travel to be really able to participate in meetings and contribute to the discussions. So I think I would leave it there for the moment.
Right. Thank you very much, Maitane, for this perspective and for addressing the main points on the side of SMEs in their involvement in standardization. Now, to give the perspective of the European standardization organizations, actually, we will now move to Ms. Elena Santiago, who has been Director General of Sensenelec since 2010, and previously had been already been Director General of Senelec since 2003. So, Ms. Santiago, thank you for being here. And to go back maybe to a more general perspective, what is your general view and the view of Sen and Senelec on the strategy, and which steps do the ESOs foresee to take to support its implementation, particularly regarding the evaluation of the governance? Thank you.
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for SBS for organizing this event, because I think that Maitane has been mentioning one of the obstacles is awareness. And these kind of events are those that really contribute to raise awareness and to try to share with those that are not so involved in standardization the importance of actively contribute and to follow the standardization activities. So just going back to your question, we in Sen and Senelec, we really welcome the European Standardization Strategy, mainly because we believe it has taken the European standardization to the strategic level that it deserves. We see this as a wake-up call for all the stakeholders, industry stakeholders, SMEs, societal stakeholders, member states, academia, to contribute to the European standardization activities. Standardization should not be activity that is a niche and that is solely reserved to a number of privileged people that understand how to navigate, but it would be better and better if we are able to enlarge the number of stakeholders that participate in the standard development process. So very important for the strategic value that it gives, but also because we see this as a great wake-up call for the European stakeholders to contribute to the European standardization activities. For us also, it's extremely important to anticipate and to work as early as possible in how to use standardization from a strategic point of view. And in that sense, we see the high-level forum that is going to be established as a very interesting initiative where we can really look into not only what is happening in the market, but also much before in the value chain, what is happening in innovation, what are the technologies in which we have got know-how, expertise, frontline positions, and to be able to transform all these front runners initiatives into market reality, because we know that this is something that where Europe has not been very good at. So a lot of investments on innovation, yet to realize, to translate innovation into the market game has not been really a success. And we believe standardization is extremely important to disseminate innovation and disseminate it fast, which today it is extremely important. I would also like to recall on what Mr. Butikofer has said, because we should not forget, and this is something that maybe we are missing a little bit in the strategy, that we have got a huge number of transformational challenges. So one of the elements that I am missing in the strategy that we are missing is an emphasis also on the digital transformation, because digital ready legislation, the fact that we need to be able as European standards organizations to deliver smart standards, digital solutions that can really address the Green Deal and address the 14 ecosystems that have been introduced in the industrial policy. It is important, but yet we cannot cover everything in the strategy. A little point that we would like to see further developed. Another important element that we see in the strategy that we in the Senate we have been not complaining, but somehow asking for improvement is coordination. Coordination of only member states, but also coordination between the different policy initiatives and policymakers when they use standardization. The strength of standardization is to be able to use it in a coherent manner, to make it consistent so that we all know where we are going and we are able to use the tool in the best possible way. And this is something that we see also the role of the Chief Standardization Officer, because yes, there are more than 1,000 experts working in standardization. However, if we don't coordinate and agree on where we want to go, it could not be useful to have so many experts working in standardization. The same at policy making level. So you have got different policy and regulatory initiatives in Europe, yet you can find many different ways to approach European standardization, which should be really market-driven, where there should be an early dialogue with those that need to implement measures in the market and to find a compromise where we can take the competitive advantage that standardization gives, taking into account all the values that it has. Because again, I also agree that we have got a system that is already pretty inclusive. And this doesn't mean that we don't need to make efforts to continue the inclusiveness and to continue working on how we can engage better SMEs and societal stakeholders in the standards making process. Another important element that we see is in the strategy is that it has identified the high geopolitical value that the standardization has. And this is something that we have been observing for years. We have been also trying to influence some of the trade negotiations that have been taking place, where there have been a standardization annex, where we have seen that other regions of the world have been able to utilize in a more efficient way, even if from my point of view, and I think that we have good evidence of that, our model is unique. And I used to say this is the best model in the world because it ensures consistency. It's a model that it's easy to identify where things happen, and it's a model where there is innovation-friendly legislation, which is something that it is absolutely vital these days. Finally, I would like to make a reference to education, where indeed we understand that there is this precautionary principle and that it is up to member states. And this is something that I must say it has been hard for SEN and SENELEC because of this delegation of powers in member states. It has not been that easy to engage with universities or with education programs in developing a European standardization education module. And we see this also as a call for the different stakeholders to work together and be able to educate all those that want to contribute and use European standardization in a more consistent and professional manner. I would now reply to the governance question, because I know that this is something that is very close to the SBS heart. And even if I mean, in the amendment to the regulation 1025, it is clear that the emphasis is placed on the national delegation principle, where we follow the national delegation principle, where we have got all the elements in place, where the standards are voted in line with the Nice and the Lisbon treaties in the case of SEN and SENELEC. So all the population is actually taken into account when a standard goes from one stage to the other and when it's finally approved. We have a mechanism in place in SEN and SENELEC that is called the Membership Relations and Monitoring Committee, where we have got all the criteria that the members of SEN and SENELEC have to fulfill at all times. It's not when you become a member that you just tick all the boxes. It's something that we monitor on a regular basis, on an annual basis, and where our members really have the obligation to demonstrate at any time that they follow the criteria and the requirements that allow them to be members of SEN and SENELEC. And one of those is openness and transparency, but another one is inclusiveness, where we really monitor what is happening at national level. And again, in this case, I think that the way in which SEN SENELEC is a structure, where we have got national members, where you have members that speak the language of the different member states in the union and beyond, because we have got more members, where it is a close organization that can address specific questions, that are engaged, that can take initiatives in order to call, to help, to accompany, to translate, if you so wish, the standardization requirements for those that maybe don't have the resources or the understanding of how European standardization works. Yet, in this exercise that we do every year, we are actually looking into what are the practices that are established at national level in order to address inclusiveness. And we identify what are the best practices that can be shared with other members of SEN and SENELEC, and we will indeed promote those best practices. In the understanding that diversity in our community is the diversity that we have in the Union, that all member states, you have, 27 member states, 27 different ways to approach standardization at national level, 27 ways to organize the national standardization system, because it is reporting on, or because the economy is organized in a different way. But it's very important to look into what others are doing, to learn from what they are doing, to also partner with organizations like SBS and the different national members of SBS that can also support and work together with the national members of SEN and SENELEC in order to learn what are the issues, what are the challenges, how those challenges can be identified, and if we can introduce a specific action. So what we are doing now in Senelec is developing a draft action plan. And this draft action plan is not only addressing the governance action, but all the other actions that are extremely important for us, because of course it's at the heart of our activities. And first of all, what we wouldn't like is that the Commission reinvent the wheel. So where there's already activities ongoing, maybe not finalized, but already ongoing, that the Commission build up on those actions that are ongoing, and that we can contribute to the implementation of this high-level strategy that I think Europe really, really needs. And if we get it right, we can utilize in a way that can be useful for all of us.
Thank you very much, Ms. Santiago, for this very honest, very open and thorough assessment. Now, due the previously mentioned scheduling constraint, we will quickly go back to Mr. Butikofer, since he's due to leave soon, unfortunately, for a follow-up question to his first intervention, and then we will hear again from Ms. Vaccaro and continue with our discussion. So, Mr. Butikofer, ahead, again, looking at the big picture and the international dimension, going back in part to the last point you made in your first intervention, more and more countries such as China, the US, are more and more recognizing the strategic and geopolitical role of standardization. In this sense, what should be done, what could be done to ensure that European companies and particularly SMEs are not put at a disadvantage? Thank you.
Thank you for the follow-up. I can give you only a very short answer. I believe that the burden is not just on the Commission and not just on member states to recognize the relevancy of standardization. The burden is also on industry itself. And just as much as it is true to say that maybe not all the relevant political decision makers, lawmakers, regulators have always given enough attention to standardization, I think it could also be fair to say that not all CEOs have always given enough attention to these issues. So the rethinking has to be on all fronts. It is something that industry can demand, should demand from policymakers, but that's also something that industry has to contribute. Second, I believe that it is important to have a clear focus of where we're driving. If the European Union would pursue a goal of just protecting its own back, chances are we might not be utterly successful, because everybody else would consider us just as selfish as everybody else too. I think what we should pursue is guaranteeing a fair chance for European industry by guaranteeing a fair system. Our system internally is as fair as it gets. I think we all can agree on that. And we can, of course, gradually improve also the inclusiveness where it doesn't yet fully satisfy our expectations. But we have to form international alliances with other countries that also want to be able to pursue their own interests in a fair competition. And if we make clear, if we strongly advocate such an approach, an inclusive approach, where we team up with like-minded partners, then I think we can be more successful than if we just think about how do we protect our own position. I believe insisting on a fair approach is the best defense of our own interest.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Butikofer, for your opinion, for your insight, and for remaining with us despite your very busy schedule and agenda. We truly appreciate it, and we thank you for your presence at our event. So goodbye, have a great
Goodbye.
day. Bye. So we will now go back to Ms. Vaccaro, who opened the proceeding with her opening remarks. And as we've seen so far, the strategy sets out a very ambitious set of goals to be pursued. But obviously, there's still a lot of work left to be done in terms of implementation and putting into practice the announced measures. Yourself, you mentioned some of them in your opening remarks. Particularly the high-level forum, Excellence Hub, the creation of the post of Chief Standardization Officer. So in this sense, maybe you can give us some more details or maybe a timeline of what we can expect from this point of view, and in general of the implementation of the measures outlined in the different parts of the package that includes the standardization strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, no problem. Well, first of all, I would like to say that the strategy is definitely work in progress. It was adopted on the 2nd of February. We are on the 19th of April. So things are moving, but we are not quite there yet. For the Chief Standardization Officer, I can tell you that it's a college nomination, and we expect a decision to be taken before the summer. We sort of have an idea who that person may be, but for the moment, nothing is official until it's official, like they say. Regarding the high-level forum, it will be a commission decision, and the rules that we applied will be the commission rules for expert group. And again, once the commission decision is there will be a call for expression of interest of people who'd like to participate in the high-level forum. And I wasn't sure, because I'm not working directly on that, I wasn't sure the SMEs will have a role, and that this expert group will have a good representation on the geographical level, on the gender level, and on the kind of stakeholders level. And again, the first constitution meeting of the high-level group should take place after the summer. So it's something that is moving. My colleagues are working on it, and you will get all the relevant information as soon as it's out. And regarding the focus group on standardization internal to the Commission, as I said, this is a little bit of our internal cuisine, and but again, everyone will be informed as soon as we have something, some structure in place.
Thank you very much again, Ms. Vaccaro, for these clarifications and for these timelines that you have given us concerning a number of the new measures outlined in the strategy. Now, to continue with our second round of questions, again,
Yeah, sorry, I think you muted yourself, so we couldn't hear you for a bit.
Oh, okay. What did you miss? Because I haven't been speaking since Andrea has been speaking.
No, Andrea, and I didn't hear Andrea. What you said.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, it must have been a very quick problem on my side. Apologies for that. So yeah, as I was saying, I was thanking Ms. Vaccaro for the clarification and the timeline on a number of the new measures outlined in the strategy. So going back again to our role, the role of SMEs in standardization, to the issues of inclusiveness, and particularly our representations, Maitana, would come back to you on this. What could and should be done in practice in terms of nuts and bolts of real measures to promote the inclusion and the impact of SMEs in the standards development process? So more on the development side this time. And what are the key points that we should focus on? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for the question. Well, I think I mentioned before that one of the main obstacles was awareness in general, but also awareness regarding the developments of standards. I think important measure, and this is something SBS is also working on, but an important measure would be to try to have an effective and good system for monitoring of developments. This is something that is somehow also touched upon in the strategy. I think one of the first things in order to basically ensure the effective participation of SMEs is precisely to be able to identify those topics, areas, developments, standardization activities that are relevant for SMEs. Just to keep in just few figures, if we take into account that in 2020 alone, SEN and SENELEC developed around 1,600 European standards and other documents, and if we take into account that we, of course, also have other standardization bodies at European level, plus the international activities, you can imagine that it's quite difficult for an SME to know everything that is going on. Moreover, we also know that there are more and more activities dealing with horizontal subjects, horizontal issues, accessibility, circular economy, etc. So for me, one important element, and as I said, we are working on that also from the side of SBS, but I think it would be better if we try to have a system where all stakeholders could find the relevant information at all levels without having to try to figure it out by going to different websites. That would be already a good achievement that I'm sure could also help the involvement of SMEs and relevant stakeholders in standardization work. A second point, which I think is important, is also the issue of resources. I mentioned it before, and I mention it again, because I think this is really important. We saw the strategy has an ambition to be more active at the international level. I think this ambition should be basically combined with additional resources. Otherwise, I don't think we will be able to achieve this ambition. So basically, we need to increase the resources for the participation of European stakeholders and particularly SMEs to participate at the international level, at all levels, but as well at the international level. The European Commission is already financing SME participation through SBS. There are also other projects through Horizon Europe, etc., where there is financing for participation of European stakeholders in standardization. So there is a lot being done already at European level, but I think it is important that national governments also support the participation of SMEs at national, European, and the international level. So that would be also a second point, which I think is important, to try to increase the resources also at the national level. Then we were talking before about the governance and the amendment to the regulation. I think a more balanced representation of stakeholders in the standardization process is essential. Elena already mentioned that there has been progress, and we know there has been progress. Inclusiveness since the adoption of the regulation has also improved, but as we said, there is still room for improvement. We in SBS support the amendment to the objectives of the amendment to the regulation, but we should also bear in mind that we also need to improve the inclusiveness at the national level in order for this to really work and to make sure that this there is really a balanced representation of all the interest at the European and the international level, but also at the national level. I think is key. From our side, SBS, together with the other Annex 3 organizations, this is ANEC, ETUC and ECOS have made specific suggestions to ETSI to improve their governance, and we are also working, and we will work as well in some suggestions that we will be happy to discuss afterwards with SEN and SENELEC regarding possible improvements as well. And then finally, there is a point which I think is important, and sometimes maybe is not so much mentioned in the discussions regarding standardization and representation of SMEs in standardization. And I think is the role of professional organizations. This is very important in order to bridge the gap between SMEs and standardization and to be able to represent the collective interest of SMEs. So I always stress this, and I think it's important to stress it again and again. As we said, for SMEs, it is difficult to have the resources to participate. Many of them get informed and actually participate in standardization through SME organizations in order to represent their interest. It's a way also to put resources together and be able to represent their interests. So from our, and I think Elena mentioned this somehow before, we should really encourage standardization bodies to further work with SME associations to ensure the representation of SME interest in their work. The Commission is carrying out a study on the, I think it's called on the function and effects of European standards. It's a study where I don't know when it will be published, but there was a workshop in February, and in that workshop some of the preliminary conclusions clearly showed that the further away we go from national standardization, so to European international standardization, the role of associations, federations to represent the interest of SMEs becomes bigger, because it's more difficult for SMEs to participate directly. So I think this is also something that we need to stress, and we need really to leverage on to try to work more with federations and associations representing SME interest in order to improve their participation and representation in standardization in general.
Right. Thank you, Maitane, for these further points you made, and particularly for the focusing on inclusiveness at all levels of the standardization environment. Here, next to the issues that we have touched more in detail so far, there are still some that were maybe only mentioned in passing. For instance, this one that was briefly mentioned by Ms. Vaccaro in her opening statement about the vital need for anticipation and responsiveness to standardization needs and timely delivery of standards. In this sense, the Commission and the ESOs sort of represent two sides of the same coin to an extent. So I would like to go maybe with the same question both to Ms. Santiago and Ms. Vaccaro. The ESOs and the Commission have established, as we know, a joint task force to deal with these issues of timely delivery particularly. And here at SBS, obviously, we have kept up with some of the progress that has been made via the workshops that have been organized on the work of the task force. But maybe we could go a bit more detail on this and communicate it to the wider audience of our participants, of our audience. What progress do you foresee in these areas of responsiveness and timely delivery, and which measures do you aim to take to address these issues? So which one of you would like to go first on this? Thank you.
I can go first. I mean, if Silvia is okay with that, because thank you, because I am actually co-chairing the task force that we have established with the European Commission. So first of all, I think that this task force is the evidence that we are all making a great effort in order to address the timely delivery of European standards to support the European policies and legislation. We have already organized a couple of workshops, and in those workshops we have shared the progress that we have made. It took us a little bit of time actually to be able to organize the work, but I think that now we are really full speed, and the elements that we have been discussing are first the development of a standardization request, and how can we make sure that all the relevant parties, and here it's not only industry or standards makers, but really SMEs, consumers, environmental organizations, member states can contribute to the quality of the drafting in the standardization request, which is the invitation that the Commission sent to the ESOs after the member states' approval to develop standards to support policies and legislation. And actually, we have also agreed to kind of a checklist where we can say, okay, we are comfortable with, which is of course not binding because this is a Commission process. But in this checklist, we can identify where we can find some pain points later in the development of the standards, and what can we do in order to address those, or where we can have some clarifications on how to translate legal requirements in technical requirements to be then included in the European standards. So this is something that we have achieved so far. We have also been working on the standard development process and the interaction of the Commission and the HAS consultants in the standard development process while implementing those standardization requests. And here again, what we have tried to do is to ensure the interaction as early as possible in the standards development process, to provide support by the secretariats of SENS and ALEC and ETSI to the technical committee so that we can do a kind of quality check prior to proceed with the different stages of the standards, and before even a standard goes on public inquiry, that we can have the more mature draft that is going to be shared so that we can anticipate and accelerate the process. Of course, here there is always there is a challenge because I think it was Maitane, the one that said there is more and more horizontal standards that actually are addressing horizontal pieces of legislation, like the one that I understand is going to come on artificial intelligence, or like the one that is going to come on cybersecurity. And in those cases, I think that industry, and I understand also SMEs, are struggling in translating the legal requirements that are continuously evolving into technical requirements to address those legal aspects. So I think that it's extremely important that here we all work together. We try to understand what is the objective and how we can achieve those objectives. And this is what we are trying to do also in the task force. What we have in mind now is to develop the action plan so that we can also share it with all the stakeholders where we are, where we want to be, and what are the different milestones that we are going to establish. And just to conclude, there is a very important activity, a work stream, because I have focused this first part of my intervention with a work stream that is relating to operational improvements, so timely citation of standards in the official journal, but also there is a very important work stream that is actually a strategic alignment. And the work stream strategic alignment that is very much connected from my point of view with a high-level group that the Commission is going to establish. There we are going to engage on 2 pilot exercises. We have already started with hydrogen so that we are able to connect. Again, Mr. Butikofer said, yes, many CEOs are not really aware of what is the strategic value of a standardization, and he's absolutely right. And the idea here is really to connect the strategic layers in the companies with the innovation and research, with the standards makers, and with the relevant stakeholders, as early as possible in the process, so that when at the end of the day, the standards organization need to develop standards, we keep in mind all the different technology developments and market needs that, that we have at hand. So that is for the strategic alignment. So on hydrogen, we are starting with a pilot project, and we have already agreed on a pilot project on artificial intelligence, where actually the idea would be to develop a European standardization roadmap, taking into account all the different pieces pieces of the puzzle. So we have got legislation that is on the making, standards that are on the making, national, European, and international activities, and a lot of stakeholders with very diverse interests that would need to contribute to this European standardization roadmap. So I think that in a nutshell, this is where we are with the task force works.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Santiago, particularly for your update on the work of the task force. We know that you are more involved on this directly than Ms. Vaccaro, so maybe for her, we will go a bit more in general on the topic of anticipation and responsiveness to standardization needs rather than the timely delivery, which we have tackled quite in detail with Ms. Santiago. Ms. Vaccaro, you have the floor.
Thank you. Indeed, I'm not directly involved with the task force. The only thing I would like to underline is that there has been a very big progress in the past couple of years, because if we think about the problem of the backlog of just a couple of years ago, we had more than 600 standards that were not cited in the official journal. And I think now that that number is down to a very manageable level. And I think that, as always, communication is the most important tool to solve the problems. Because if the Commission stays on one side and the ESOs on the others, without communicating, without trying to find a solution, we are going nowhere. Regarding the anticipation, it's true that we are, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet for that. So we will have really to work, again, communicating with the research world, together with the industry, the SMEs, especially the one who do innovation, and the large percentage of innovators are actually SMEs. So there will be a need again to find a way to tune in the innovation together with the standardization at the right moment. As I said, there's no silver bullet, so we will work on it, and we count on the cooperation of SMEs and ESOs and even national standards body, because as Elena said, hydrogen is a very up and coming issue, and also the others that she mentioned. It's true that we need to find strategic issues that are important to forward the European economy, basically.
Okay, thank you very much again, Ms. Vaccaro. We will now move on to our Q&A session. I would like, first of all, to thank our audience for their feedback. It's great to see the level of interest, involvement, and interaction that you've showed. Unfortunately, this also means that we'll not be able to address all the questions that you have submitted to our speakers. So we will have to go through a selection of some kind. First off, I would like, it's a question from our audience, actually addressed to Ms. Vaccaro, regarding your mention in early on in your opening remarks of the contact between EU values and standards. Are there good examples or some examples that you would use to underline when maybe those two factors haven't dovetailed that much? So areas in which it's been difficult to incorporate EU values in standards that we as Europeans have had to accept, or areas in which it is particularly difficult to put our position forward?
Yes, I will make, unfortunately, as always, we have only negative examples. So the first one is also the one that is being used widely by my director. Basically, some time ago, there was a new ISO TC on lithium. And we all know how lithium is of strategic importance for microchips and other things. And basically, we learned via our Australian friends that China had basically gotten the chairmanship and the secretariat of this group. And this really was a wake-up call for us in the sense that there is the need, as also Mr. Butikofer said, of having some sort of internal coordination to see where European interests are at stake. And the other example that everyone knows is AI. So basically, the difference between the European, the American, let's say the Western values of the ethic in AI is really important. While we have our friends in China who think that AI is a perfect way to controlling the population by face recognition, which is not only to open your phone, but it is really to analyze your behavior. So these are the kind of things that we would like to prevent, and we would like to be able to influence, because we wouldn't like to live in a world where AI is used to control your behavior rather than simplify your life. So these are they're a bit extreme examples, but it really gave us the idea that that Europe and our like-minded partners should keep an eye on developments in standardization. In ITU, for example, also China is having a lot more interest and is trying to have influence on things that they are not really democratic, and we see it, for example, in cybersecurity. So we really need to be careful, because the world is changing, and it's changing very fast, and it's not always evident to keep pace with the challenge. You're muted.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I sort of missed the right click. So let's see, we have another question here for Ms. Santiago, actually, about the evolution of the European standardization system in light of the strategy and the modifications that will come with it, and how this might influence the relationship with international standardization, so with the international standardization organizations.
Yes, well, I think that to evolve is always very good. I think we need also to be autocritic, and as I said, for us, the standardization strategy is a great opportunity to improve. First, I do hope that the European standardization strategy, as I said before, is a nice wake-up call to make a more efficient use of the agreements that we have in place. I must say that I somehow disagree with the request of Maitane to say, look, we need more resources to work in international, national, European. I think we need to work more efficiently. And this is all combined, and it's so let's have an agreement of what is important to develop at international level, and let's coordinate expertise at international level. And it's not something that we are not doing today, but we see that this is a very nice evolution and a very nice input that we get from the strategy. So let's decide what is best for Europe and where we need to put our energy, and let's coordinate that. So if we need to have international standards, because as I said before, it's going to bring a competitive advantage, and this is all about geopolitics to the European economy, let's get our experts act together at international level. And then we have got very good agreements in place to make sure that those international standards where we have put our energy, our efforts, our knowledge, and that should reflect the European values are also European standards at the same time, because this is what the Vienna and the Frankfurt Agreement means for the international and the European standardization system. So it's really to coordinate better what and to anticipate where we need standards and where is the right basket to put our efforts. It doesn't mean that, and for that, that I don't think that it's extremely important to improve and to increase the number of SMEs participating in the European standardization. But I do believe that is or international or national, but I think it's maybe more important to make sure that we orchestrate that work better. And this is what we see as a very interesting call from the European Standardization Strategy. So in the Sense Strategy 2030, we have established 5 projects. One of the projects is precisely to develop a mechanism that can help the European standards bodies to identify what kind of strategic developments are taking place at international level, so that, as I said, we can coordinate the experts, that we don't have many, just to be very clear. I mean, this is something that it's a fact. I mean, before there were a lot of European experts contributing to the international standardization activities. Then a lot of activities moved out from Europe. We missed a lot of expertise, and there are other regions in the world that have got higher population that can send 10 experts, while we can maybe have only one in the international community. So this is something that is not necessarily related only to SMEs or to societal stakeholders. But I think that it's important that we have a very strategic approach to what we need and to orchestrate that at the level that it will have the wider effect and impact on the European economy.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. We will go to, I think we have time for a couple more questions. We will go to another question from our audience, actually from one of our SBS experts, regarding on how the European Commission is planning to support companies in their standardization efforts and in their efforts to be involved in standardization, whether that concerns travel or other training or other financial and non-financial costs involved. For instance, now, as our audience member says, some of that support goes through third-party funding from Horizon Europe or from some other sources. Do you foresee to maintain this current model, or there will be like a paradigm shift in terms of supporting companies for their standardization efforts? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. The very short answer is I don't really know. But apart from that, well, Horizon Europe is still financed by the European Union, so I wouldn't call it as third-party funding. However, I think that the idea will be, and that will probably be also discussed at the high forum level, will be to find a way that's more efficient and more streamlined to finance the activities. But as Elena said, also to work more efficiently on the issue and on the participation of societal stakeholders to the standardization. Because, as you know, unfortunately, and it's really unfortunate, at the international level, they don't have the same inclusiveness principle that we have at European level. So one other avenue that we are exploring is try to have direct contacts with ISO and IEC in order to try to get a little bit more space and a little bit more listening to societal stakeholders. In ISO, they have something for consumers, but apart from that, there is absolutely no particular attention to SMEs or environmental organization, or trade unions. So this is something that we are trying to address, but obviously the European Union and the European Commission in particular, we have, yes, some sort of liaison with ISO, but we absolutely have nothing with IEC. So I think that all these issues will have to be taken into account, definitely.
Thank you very much. So continuing, Maitane, please, I see you're raising your hand.
Yes, I wanted to maybe also complement a bit what Silvia said. And the question was referring to European funding, but I mentioned this before. And I think what is important also is that we complement this funding also with national funding. I think member states could also do more on that regard. As far as I know, there is not so much or so many countries that have funding programs in order to ensure the representation of SMEs and other stakeholders as well in standardization. So I think it is important that we coordinate the activities, as Silvia was saying, try to make it in the most efficient way, but also that this the funding that is provided at European level is also complemented with funding at national level. And I agree with Silvia, there is still a lot to be done regarding inclusiveness at international level. This is something that we have also, we recently also met ISO and IC, and actually we also met ITU to try to be more active also at international level. And indeed, you know, we don't have, and societal stakeholders don't have the same rights and position that we have at European level at the international level. And this is something that we should be from both sides, from the side of the European Commission, from the side of national standards bodies, because they are direct members as well of ISO and IC, and member states, and from our side to try to also progress in that area as well.
Thank you for this integration. And yeah, going back to our questions from the audience, there is one more general one, maybe, of what is foreseen in terms of general policy approach and other measures, let's say, to dovetail and to use standardization to support the objectives on the Green Deal. Thank you. Whoever wants to field this question.
I can start. I do believe it's the standards play a very important role in supporting the industry in achieving the objectives of the Green Deal. I think that we have heard a lot of criticisms also about we are just getting out of an economic crisis. We are really struggling with, I mean, we have an international conflict that is hitting all of us, also in the supply chains. And yet we have got very ambitious objectives, and that are going to imply a lot of investments on companies, and may affect the competitiveness of the European industry in a global market. So I think we need to put things into perspective. With European standards, I think that what we can do is to make a good assessment of how the objectives, first of all, to translate the objectives, because terminology here is very important to be able to have a fair competition in the market in order to measure, for instance, energy consumption, and in order to address renewables, which is also a very important aspect in the transformation to the Green Deal. And all of that can be achieved with good European standards that can help the European industry in getting where we need to get. But to do that, indeed, what we need to have is good experts that are able to support the European system. In Senegal, like again, we have got a project that is currently under development, where we are trying to identify on the standards that are in the making, which ones are going to support not only the green, but also the digital, so that there is a kind of flag on, okay, with this standard, we can accompany, help industry. And then there is a call also for those that are interested to contribute to that. But the idea would be really to have a good mapping of what is existing, what are the plans, and what is the time frame that we need to achieve in order to get to the objectives that are included in the Green Deal. It's a huge challenge, and just to say that we have got more than 70 technical committees that are actually supporting this, supporting the Green Deal in Senelec. In that case, I would like to go back to my Tane input that it is extremely important that we are able to put in place a system that help SMEs in particular to monitor what is happening, what is of interest for me, and that we can also count on those innovative SMEs that can contribute to the standards development process.
Please, Ms. Vaccaro, you have the floor.
Yes, just a very, very short remark that at European Commission level, this, let's say, analyzing the standards and trying to put them in line with the Green Deal and with the digital transformation, that will be actually one of the tasks of the high-level forum. That's why we would welcome good participation of SMEs and all other interests in order to select priority standards that need to be changed quickly in order to respond to these challenges.
Okay, maybe we have time to squeeze in one last question. In the spirit of always striving to improve, let's say this would be more addressed maybe to Maitane and to Ms. Santiago. If you feel that there are some points that maybe were overlooked or slightly underplayed in the strategy, or areas on which maybe you were expecting a tiny bit more, like for instance, Ms. Santiago in our earlier intervention mentioned maybe a shortcoming on the digital side. So is there anything that you would like to raise on this?
If I may, Elena, before you. Something that I miss, and now we have been talking about the green and the digital transition, and something that I miss a bit in the strategy is more about the implementation of standards. In the sense that if we want to achieve the green and the digital transition, we don't only need standards, but we need these standards to be implemented as well. And implementation of standards, especially when we are talking about complex standards, or when we are talking about, for example, digitalization, and how SMEs can benefit of some of the standards or some of the technologies and implement them in their own company in order to benefit from advantages of digitalization. I think this is very important. So from my perspective, a thing that I miss a bit from the strategy is maybe a bit more about supporting the uptake of standards and supporting the uptake of standards among SMEs, especially regarding, for example, digitalization. And to this respect, I think it's important that we have training, we have funding and help for SMEs in order to really implement these standards. So this is a point that I miss a bit. And the other point that is mentioned, but I think is something that we really need to work a bit more on it, and that, you know, the strategy doesn't say very much about it, is the inclusiveness at international level. We were talking today about the need to have also inclusiveness at international level. And the strategy just mentions that we need to encourage member states to facilitate participation societal stakeholders. I know it's difficult for the Commission to say much more than that, but I think this is a very important element. We already mentioned the issue of trade agreements, or maybe we need as well to work with like-minded countries to try to also push a bit more the inclusiveness agenda as well at the international level. So I would say these are the two elements that I miss a bit in the strategy, even though we are quite positive about the strategy overall.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes, so I mentioned before the digital transformation, and actually because I see a mismatch on all the energy that we're placing on finding digital solutions to address the European, the digital single market, because this is this is a key element. So for instance, now, and I don't want to become too technical, we're working on the information model that we need to use in our digital solutions. And if that information model doesn't interoperate with the different ecosystems, I think that we'll have to really look at, to another way to use European standards from a strategic point of view. So there are some important details, and there we would have liked to see a wake-up call for the different industry sectors to work in order to support interoperability in the digital solutions that we are developing to address the connection between standards and policy requirements. So this is one element. There is another element that for us it is important, and that has been mentioned in one of the questions, and that is the technical specifications. So one of the beauties of the European standardization model is that it's innovation friendly. Innovation friendly means that you're able to update your standards according to the state of the art, and that implies an update of the European legislation without the need to revise the legislation. If the Commission developed technical specifications, there is nothing said about how this is going to match with an innovation friendly legislation. And for that, we have some ideas that I don't think is maybe we have time to share. But I think consistency is very important. And I have mentioned that a couple of times. So the best way to use a standardization is really to be consistent and coherent. And we see that inconsistency, and that is a gap that is not, from my point of view, completely addressed in the strategy. So, and just maybe a last point, to work on inclusiveness at national level, it's will also make a difference at international level, at least in ISO and IEC, because ISO and IEC is the argument that ISO and IEC use in order to say that they comply with the inclusiveness is that they are national members based, and it's that the responsibility of the national members to make sure that the relevant stakeholders are taking part in the standardization activities that are then elevated at international level. So I think it's important to highlight the point of Maitane that it could be extremely useful to reinforce the inclusiveness in the national standards bodies with the support of member states.
Okay, so I would ask maybe for a tiny bit of patience from you, the speakers, and maybe try and squeeze in one last question, since the answers were very thorough but quite quick. And so we have here mentioned that the standardization strategy mentions the execution of a member state, the establishment of a member state benchmark in order to investigate the best examples on SME involvement and participation in standardization. But often, very often, there is not enough thought or resources put into this, and therefore insufficient awareness at the ground level and for SMEs of the importance of the tech and importance and awareness of the technical and commercial benefits of standard. How do you see this improving, and how can this benchmark be a positive move in the right direction on this issue?
Well, I can try to answer that, although it's very far from my comfort zone. So I will leave it to Maitane then to complete that. As I said before, I think the communication is the key to everything, communication and awareness. However, unfortunately, I think the idea of having a perfect system is quite far away. But as Maitane said, I think that increasing the awareness and try to get SMEs and societal stakeholders closer to standardization is definitely the answer. And once we have achieved that, and how to achieve it, probably with some really like we are organizing university days, there should be maybe something similar developed at SMEs level. And I think the event of today is already a very good example. And from the level of the question, you can see that the participants are actually quite interested and are asking very relevant questions.
Maybe just to complement, since Silvia mentioned me, I mean, within SBS is part of our job, and it's something that we are trying to do as well, to raise awareness. We know for SMEs, some of them, especially for smaller ones, they are not always aware. It was mentioned by Mr. Butikofer, not all the CEOs are aware about the importance of standardization. Not all SMEs are aware about the importance of standardization. We are very much trying to work on raising awareness, first of all. We have done national seminars. We are actually working, and we want to launch, as from next year, some kind of similar to the idea of the Commission of University Days, some kind of European SME days, because we think if we try to organize events all together, national standards bodies, SME associations, etc., we can also help to raise the awareness. And then regarding, I guess the question was referring to the peer review at national level. I think this is a very important actually initiative from the strategy. Also within Sen and Senelec, there is a SME working group, and Elena was there in the last meeting, and I already highlighted the need that we need to share more best practices and what different countries are doing regarding SME involvement. I think this is very important to try to identify what works best. So I have also high expectations from this peer review as well, and I think we can probably through this process try to identify ways in which we can better engage with the stakeholders. So yeah, just to mention that from my side.
Okay, so if there are no further comments, this brings us to the end of our event. As we've seen, just a few words, as we've seen, the standardization strategy represents a great opportunity to adapt and evolve the European standardization system in a more ambitious and inclusive sense. While there are obviously many, many positives that have been underlined here and many moves in the right direction, there is always some room for improvement, as we've seen at the end. And indeed, there will be a lot more to discuss and analyze going forward, particularly regarding the implementation of the strategy. And here at SBS, we are looking forward to contribute and participate to all upcoming developments. On behalf of SBS, of our members, of our experts, I would like to thank all of our panelists for intervening and for their insights, and to all of you in attendance for your participation, your enthusiasm, and your questions. So thank you all again, and see you soon. Goodbye.